Hello, everybody. I'm Bob Main. Welcome to another episode of the Handgun World podcast, a practical show done by a very practical guy. That's me, your host, Bob Main. This week, I have another guest. He's waiting patiently. And my series, which is called What Do You Carry and Why? In other words, what carry gun do you use and why? It's become a very popular series. I got people sending me you know, emails left and right saying, "Hey, I love it. I love it." So I like to get listeners on here that are just most of them are everyday people just like me. And today I'm joined by David Hansen, and he's not too far away. He's down here in South Texas, not far from me. David, welcome to the show.
Thank you, sir. Glad being here.
Well, I don't get a chance to meet very many listeners. I'm only meeting you right now on video, hopefully in person one day, but this is a treat for me.
Well, thank you.
I
Treat for me as
appreciate it.
well, too. Whole new experience.
Yeah, don't worry, it'll be a good one. Let's get started. David, what do you carry and why?
So, what I carry is this guy here. I'm not sure how that
Ooh,
shows up in video.
shows up fine. 1911.
So, it's a 1911. Specifically, it's a lightweight commander, which
Ah,
means it has the aluminum frame. For those who don't know, they're 1911s because more and more common these days. And it has
uh-huh.
a 4 1/4 inch barrel, and it's chambered in 9 millimeter. And it's interesting because the Commander was originally issued as an aluminum frame 9 millimeter way back in the 50s. Not issued, but came out as.
Hmm.
But nobody could get him to run forever. And then probably the single most important thing is Bill Wilson broke the code with magazines.
Yes, he did.
And at that point, people started going, hey, wait a minute. There might be something more to this. So I know I'm an old guy and I got a 1911, but it I grew up. I pulled my first trigger when I was 4 years old,
Wow.
and I grew up from a little guy reading Jeff Cooper.
Okay.
So by the time I was like old enough to be into guns, which in Arizona at that time was like 18, I had a Smith 4506 for a year, and then I moved over to a 1911, and I carried a 1911 religiously for a very long time. But I got sick and tired of putting gunsmiths kids through college, and I got rid of the 1911. And
That's
I
a good
had,
way to put it.
oh, it was horrible. I mean, I owned, people were like, well, I mean, how many 1911s did you have? I'm like, well, like 25, 28, something like that. And they
Oh my
all needed
goodness.
work, right? And
Oh
some of it I could
man.
do myself, but most of it I couldn't. And I carried a Browning high power a lot, but I was fortunate to grow up at the time in that it was the transition between revolvers and autos. So I was carrying Smith and Wesson revolvers, Ruger revolvers. I didn't land on any single thing. I really tried, hand on the Bible, to like the Glock 19. I've owned more Glock 19s than anything else, probably other than 1911s, because it is the perfect gun. But and I have one sitting in the safe. I use it in the summertime when I sweat all over it.
Yeah.
But the 1911 in 9 millimeters started to get a lot of traction. I was like, you know what? What I wanted was a Jason Burton Heirloom Precision 1911. His stuff is like insanely expensive, and he lived in the same town I did at the time, and I was like, that's just not going to happen realistically. But rather than spending a bunch of money on some other brand, I'm like, I'm just going to either a Wilson or a Nighthawk. I like the feel of the Nighthawks a little bit better. Ordered it from them. It's only got a couple things that I spec'd out differently from the
So
shop.
yours is a Nighthawk?
Yeah, it's a Nighthawk.
Oh, a Nighthawk 9 millimeter 1911.
Yep.
Beautiful. That's a nice gun,
Thank you.
David. That's nice.
And it has never failed, never bobbled on me, and it is probably the only gun in my safe that has not been modified to some extent or another.
You don't need to.
No, they did it for me.
Yeah, you don't need to. I mean, those guns are beautiful and very well designed.
Yeah, and I like the 1911 one. I just have so much experience with it. Right, it's probably the only gun other than the Smith K-frame revolver that I can detail strip easily. And with that sliding trigger, it just it's so easy to make the hits. Like
Yeah.
it's not an excuse not to go to the range, but if you can't make it to the range, it's more forgiving on the shooter. I found
Yeah. And so how many rounds does that hold?
10+1.
10 plus 1. So you're using probably Wilson combat magazines,
I
right?
am. No, I've never had a problem. In all honesty, I've never had a problem with the Nighthawk mags,
Yeah.
but I carry and primarily use the Wilson mags. Yeah, I
10
think they're
plus 1. So you got a nice 11 round gun. That aluminum
yeah.
frame, that aluminum frame 9 millimeter 1911. About how much does that weigh?
Oh
You know?
wow.
I
What's
bet
the
it's
regular one?
I bet
36.
it's less than 30 ounces
I
probably.
think it's right in there. It might be 26, 30. I was
Yeah.
just actually looking it up the other day. I want to say just yeah, a hair under 30
So it's not too heavy to
ounces.
carry then.
No, it's not. And let me preface this by saying nobody has the right to tell anybody else how many rounds they should or can have in a gun.
Yeah.
For
True.
myself, 10+1, I feel fine with it.
Yeah.
I do carry a spare mag. I know the odds of needing it are like between 0 and nothing.
But carry it anyway.
Carry it anyways. It's lightweight insurance, and it's also a spare. It goes back to my 1911 45 days. It's spare feed insurance. If the gun
That's a
doesn't
good way to
feed,
put it. Spare. Well, and like I've mentioned many times on this show, it's for clearing malfunctions and putting in a new magazine. That's
exactly.
what that's mostly for.
Yep.
Um, the chances of you having to use a new magazine because you had a malfunction, that's a far greater chance than needing more than the 11 rounds to win the fight.
Yes.
Far greater chance.
And honestly, how many of us are good enough to win a fight that needs 11 rounds? I was never in a SWAT team. I was never in the military. Like if I get through more than I mean, I'm pretty fast on the trigger, but if I get more than 4 or 5 rounds downrange, something's gone horribly wrong. I mean, it's horribly wrong if you use it anyways, but
Well, the statistics show for civilian defensive gun uses, the statistics show it's a 3 to 6 round affair, and then it's 99% of the time over by then.
yep.
And so, I love the Glock 19 also, and I still carry the Glock. Well, I carry a derivative of it now. I carry the Shadow Systems version of a Glock 19, but I had a Glock 19 and I carried it for years and years and years. I felt comfortable having the 16 rounds, but it got to a point where I didn't think I needed a gun that big for my use.
I totally understand. And I will plug you to Shadow Systems. You have got me thinking about adding one of their guns to my collection
Yeah.
because they are very nice guns.
Well, they are uh, a highly modified Glock. I mean, they probably would be upset, and if they're watching this, they probably are going to get mad at me now or listening to this for calling them a fancy Glock. But really, if you take apart one of the Shadow Systems guns, it is extremely similar to a fourth generation Glock, and but
They
they
have
have
a yeah.
perfected it.
They've pretty much alluded to it being a fourth generation clock
Yeah,
derivative, and it's you know, and like with Zev, you're paying for they're beautiful guns, but you are
yeah.
paying for the aesthetic.
Well, and with Shadow
No,
Systems, you're paying for more functionality, which,
yep,
I learned once, and I want to talk more about what you carry, but I learned that I calculated how much money I put into one of my Glock 19s, and it was about $1,600
yeah,
total. I did that over about 5 years. Over about 5 years, I spent between 1,500 and 1,600 modifying the thing. And I bought a Shadow Systems MR920 a year and a half ago for like 829 for about half the price, and it was basically a same or even better gun than my nicely modified Glock 19.
yep.
So that's why I say that. But today it's the P365 for me, and this is a P365X with 12 rounds in the mag and 12 plus one in the chamber. I'm comfortable.
Yeah, I shot the 365 when they first came out, and I thought there's a lot of potential there. They didn't have the different sizes at the time. One big thing for me, and my friends here at Ad Nauseum, is that make sure you can drive the gun. Right. There's aiming and moving, which is kind of like imagine taking a minivan to Lowe's. And then there's driving the gun, which is taking a Ferrari through the hill country.
Hmm.
And it's like I need to be able to make that gun do what I need it to do when I need to do it.
Exactly. Exactly. That is, David, I'm glad you made that point. So, what do you like most about your Nighthawk 9 millimeter, especially as it relates to driving the gun?
Um, Obviously, the feel is very familiar, right? But it's large enough for me to get a good purchase on without being overly sized. I have used, and continue to use to a certain amount, both Berettas and SIGs. And sometimes I wonder if the engineers were shooters or just engineers because those are really big guns.
And
And
heavy and kind of clunky.
yeah, kind of clunky. Sorry, my text thing went off.
That's okay.
Um, the 1911 is very thin. It's a very svelte gun, especially when you consider a 45. But when they back the barrel off, it changes the balance, but then you bring the balance back to where it needs to be with the aluminum frame. So it's a great feeling gun, even better than a steel frame. Now the steel frame is going to recoil less, which may or may not be an issue with 9 millimeter.
Nine
But
millimeters, not much recoil anyway.
no, it's just the energy to. You don't want the frame soaking up so much energy that it fails to cycle the slide, because then you got to deal with different spring rates and whatnot.
So, what exactly do you mean by driving the gun?
So I need to get a purchase on it. I need to bring it out and either kept at the low ready or onto a target, depending on what the situation is. Do I need to move from multiple targets? Do I need to move through a crowded room? Do I need to move through an empty house or a house that's supposed to be empty? And my family may or may not be up when I don't know it. I need that gun to be in exactly the position that I need it to be in with me hardly even thinking about it.
There you go.
And and yeah, that takes familiarity with the gun. I mean, you're not going to pick up a strange gun. I'm not going to pick up your SIG and have that ability that you do, right? But I need something that fills the hand. A lot of these tiny little guns, and I spent a lot of time with J frames. I'm like, they
Hmm.
work, and you can do stuff with them, but there's just not enough there.
There's not. You're right. The smaller guns, there's not. They're harder to shoot.
They are much harder to shoot, and they're harder to just drive between targets or pull back off target, which is just as important as driving on target. Um, and I think, and there are times for compromises, as you well know. Sometimes it's like, listen, I can either go unarmed or carry a really tiny gun. I'm okay. I'll carry a really tiny gun, but
Sometimes I do that too.
but those are the what's important, most important at the moment.
Yeah.
So, and I went with 9 instead of 45, and that I'm getting older, got arthritis. Most of my guns are in 9 millimeter these days. Even Cooper said, the best thing about 9 millimeter is the guns are chambered for, and and I have a ton of the Federal 9 BPLE hollow points. So that's an old round, but it still works extremely well. It's extremely accurate. The feeds and everything. And when you're trying to, you know, put the gun in, load the gun in the office and by the bed and in your wife's hand and your
Yeah.
own on your belt, preferably with the same stuff, something that's designed to feed is good.
And I
Uh,
would imagine that you can buy 9 millimeter ammo in larger bulk and less money than 45, right?
oh, way,
Yeah.
way, 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 way. Yeah, it's like 45. I haven't priced 45 lately because I hardly shoot it anymore.
I
But I
haven't
think for
either.
what 50% more, it's
Yeah.
it's a huge markup. Yeah, or not markup, but just much more.
So you can drive the gun well with your Nighthawk 9 millimeter.
Yes.
Good. And that's important. You have to be able to perform when the flag goes up.
Yeah.
And it's not something that we want to do. It's not something that we look forward to doing or we wake up wanting to do, but we're ready. And if it happens, if the stink goes down and you're being attacked and somebody's trying to kill you or a loved one, you got to be able to perform with what you're carrying.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, the thing about I'm fine with 10 plus 1 as a civilian because my main goal is to never have a contact or break contact if I get into one.
Yeah.
I'm not a police officer or a soldier who has to go hunt down the stuff. Hopefully, I'm never in that position, right?
No.
If I am, I'm gonna, have something probably with a lot more rounds to it. But I have the luxury of 10 plus 1. I wear mil sparks inside the waistband, summer special.
That's what I was going to ask.
Yeah, I've used their stuff for years and years and years, and I carry a spare mag in a Mitch Rosin Spear Offside, which has the flashlight in the back and the spare mag in the front.
Excellent. The summer special, that again, that's made by Milt
That's
Sparks.
Yep, yes, sir.
Yeah, that thing's been an old standard, been around a long time. I bet it works
Oh,
well.
Bruce Nelson invented it back in the '60s, early
Yeah.
'70s. I may switch to a JM Custom Kydex inside the waistband. Um, they're thin and they work. Honestly, they work so well. Don't tell them Sparks because I don't want to break anybody's heart. I love good leather, but those sometimes if you get a really good custom, not custom, but a really good Kydex holster,
You're right.
they're just so good. It's impossible to ignore.
Well, they are. I have a question, and then I'm going to let you go on the video portion of this, but we're going to continue this podcast
Sure.
for those who tune in on the audio. And by the way, just to let the listeners and viewers know, if you're a viewer, you're watching me on YouTube right now, but you can go to handgunworld.com. You can subscribe to this audio podcast that I do almost once a week. Anywhere you get podcasts, it'll be on there. So find me. And I like what you just said about Kydex holsters. This is my most carried holster. Can you see this?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
This
Can.
is my outside the waistband made by Concealment Solutions. And when I drop this SIG in there, it hides perfectly. And I got 13 rounds, and I don't feel uncomfortable with 13 rounds in this little gun.
No.
And
I
you feel comfortable with 10 plus one, don't you?
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of the things to watch on the smaller guns is, are you getting enough velocity for your hollow point to open?
Great point. Great point, David. With that, I'm going to go ahead. I'm going to tease the viewers a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and shut off the video, but we're going to talk about velocity in the audio podcast, and that's a great point. So for everybody watching this on YouTube, thank you very much. Subscribe to this channel, like this video, drop some comments in it. I appreciate you watching, and get subscribed to the audio podcast. So, I'm Bob Main, and this video is out.